Just waiting a second before it starts. So welcome. Today's presentation is going to be about the cartography program that we have been working on with Takata's Research Center for the last 4 or 5 years. Takata's Research Center's Habitat Cartography project aims to create geospatial analysis tools for the study and conservation of the habitats of Mahahual, that being the reef, the seagrass prairies, and mangrove forest. The maps that we create, we use them to feed and help in our environmental conservation and intervention programs, and they're available for to support local conservation initiatives. So today we're gonna have Chloé Pilon Vaillancourt, who is an engineering physics student at the Polytechnique de Montréal in Canada, who has been leading phase 6 of our mapping project. In phase 6 of this project, we have been trying to understand the connections between Mahahual's reefs and mangrove ecosystems, and the work that Chloé has been doing in Takata has consisted in analyzing the hydrological dynamics by flood mapping and measuring elevation variations and groundwater characterizations. So she will be sharing the results of her research. Chloé, still bit?
Yeah, can you hear me well?
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to present you today the methodologies for flood mapping. So I was approached to first do like exactly as Andres said, the hydrological mapping and the elevation mapping of Mahahual. As it was the first phase, we ended up mostly finding the methodologies that would be the most useful and that could be pursued by other interns following the present research. So I'm going to start with the objective and choices of methodology. So what we wanted to do and why we chose them. I'm going to present you the 3 main methodologies that we decided to focus on. And finally, I'm going to go on with my recommendation and the conclusion for the next project. So the main objective was to determine the hydrological patterns in Mahahual mangroves area to understand which areas are more appropriate for restoration efforts. So what I realized first doing a lot of academic research at the beginning was that there was a lack of hydrological pattern consideration for mangrove restoration, which means flooding, so the level, the frequency in the period, and just the quality of the water. So a source, temperature, moving process. So it was important to consider that for further mangrove restoration, and also as the urbanization plan was being developed in Mahahual, it was super, and Mahahual is mainly at the sea level and really close to the ocean. It's important to consider which area are more susceptible to be flooded. For example, we had a big hurricane season, so this was a great example. So the area we focused on was zone A, B, and C. In Mahahual, we have 4 types of different mangroves, and we have to consider 2 types, as I said, of water. So first, the superficial water. So this is the one after rainfall, for example, the water that is just stay above the ground, maybe the water that is directly connected to the ocean, the one that we can see with satellites or rivers, some aquifers, some cenotes we can see it from outside. And the most tricky part was probably the groundwater. So because Mahahual is part of one of the biggest aquifer in the planet, which is mostly composed of limestone. And there's a lot of cenotes, a lot of connection. This is why diving is so popular in Tulum, for example. And so it's hard to have access to that as we cannot have like images as for the superficial water. The constraints were financial, the equipment required, the knowledge. So as I started, I was not specialized in this, but I found a way to talk to professionals and find the different ways that will be more effective for the study. And a lot of energy was put in finding the good methodologies to consider the flood mapping of Mahahual. A very important one that has been considered was the piezometer measurements. So piezometers is, so you put it in the ground, and it's very sensitive to the variation of pressure. So you can see the variation of groundwater level. And it's very interesting because it's directly related to a flood, when if only for the groundwater specifically. So basically you take a piezometers, you put it on different wheels in Mahahual, and then you can, after a month and two, you can compile all the data and see what was the variation of the groundwater. Those are very expensive material. We would have been maybe able to borrow to other university, but they are few in the area, and also they are already busy at other for other study. For satellite imaging, that could have been interesting. There are also different bandwidth that we could use to try to grasp the water above the forest, above the canopy. So that could have been interesting, and they could be available publicly. The efforts were not put on that method, however. So the first methodology was a 3D mapping of elevation. So this is for superficial water, and it's probably going to be the most effective for the next interns to focus on. So the objective was to determine the main obstacles to superficial water flow and the potential areas for hydrological restoration. So the elevation in Mahahual is really small, so it's hard to see with satellite information that we have. There is not much variation. It's mostly flat in the peninsula. So those images had to be taken locally with a drone. So our tool is to provide an accurate digital topographic model of the area to, after that, simulate superficial water flow in the mangrove area. Another academic tool we could have used was Watson had adapted hydrological classification to irregular tidal regimes. So Mahahual is considered to have irregular tidal regimes, so it varies within time and within the day, within the season. And so this tool has been made for Asian mangrove species. So they do not present all the species in Mahahual, but my final report involved one I did for all the species in Mahahual, following some academic researches I found. So it could be a great indicators, but what would be even more interesting would be to do the Watson adapted hydrological classification regarding the real elevation data and the real location of all the mangrove species, that we could really understand. So if we have, for example, a new mangroves appearing, or young and healthy mangrove in some area, and to correlate them with the elevation, then we can understand what is the tidal regime, the duration of inundation of different places. So the methodologies is, so you need first to have a DJI drone, and you use drone deploy on your telephone to control the drone. Then you survey all the area to provide high resolution image. And then there's a way, for example, for us, we send them to Andres, and he was able to provide an elevation map. Then we can send it on the software QGIS to share it with everyone and to make it more accessible. And then there's the way to see the elevation map that I'm going to explain further. So it's important to mention that the first step of this were conducted with Professor Juan Sanchez from Ecosur in Chetumal. So he came Mahahual 4 times. He was able to grab some image of some areas, and then we were able to, well, I was able to understand more the first step for this methodology. Unfortunately, it was not available for to grab all the image and with more complex resolution. So this will have to be taken in charge by another intern. The final purpose of this will be to compare it to INEGI elevation map. So This map here has been made available in 2015, so we can see like the variation of elevation. So this could be very interesting to compare it with some more official data. And finally, what would be great is to use QGIS to create contour lines. So they will so we can find the elevation profile of the area and then use gradients which will be perpendicular to those contour lines, as we know that water will flow from the higher state to the lower one. The second methodology was the chemical analysis of water. So oops, sorry for the thing in the PowerPoint. So yeah, exactly. So it was, the objective was to understand the connection of groundwater and chemical information for mangrove restoration. So in that sense, we were hoping that we could make connection of water flow. For example, if some area were related in their information or their chemical information, to make gradients of how much the seawater is penetrating inland, for example. And of course, they will provide direct information. So for example, is this place too acid for any type of mangrove? Is this, what the salinity is really, really related to a different type of mangroves, and so on. So the tool was the chemical analysis of water in various wells using a multi-parameter water quality probe. So this is a very specific instrument, and this was provided by Dr. Betsabet Parafox from CAPA in Chetumal. And so she was very, very kind. She came to Mahahual for a whole weekend, and we went to different wells to have access to groundwater, and all those wells were in either zone A, B, and C. To find those wells, we use information from CAPA and INEHI that were provided by Joan Sanchez. And we probably went to 30 different locations, and we were able to see the condition of the well, the condition of the water, if it was accessible, if it was still used, if it was used by the locals, if we could have access. And we ended up finding 15 locations that we could use for the water analysis. So this is an example of the chemical analysis produced for 14 sampling points in Mahahual, Mexico, that we took in November 2020. So this was during the rain season. So we had to first make sure that it would not have been raining for 24 to 48 hours before. So we can see we have the X and Y location, the temperature, the pH. We have the dissolved oxygen, the electric conductivity. We have the salinity, SNG, TDS, the depth of the well, and at what depth the sample was taken. So we could see all the evolution of the parameters. We could try to make correlations. So for the dissolved oxygen, we can see it really varies, and this is related to the fact that sometimes the wheel was just open in open air. So, and sometimes it was closed. So this wasn't really related to the location, for example. It was just related to the condition of the wheel. So with that, so this is very important to consider, as this is only had been taken on one weekend. And I will explain later on why it will be very important to maybe pursue this survey for more information. So I decided to focus on the salinity aspect because in my final report and in the report of Yanis de Pereras, which was another intern, we were able to have the salinity profile for every mangroves in Mahahual. So to know which one can tolerate more salinity and so on. So I tried to do a relation between distance from the shore and the salinity. So so obviously the big surprise was that it was going down really, really fast. So I thought that I thought that the seawater would get a more inland intrusion, but it looks like there's a high filtration as really, really early inland. So there's not, as soon as you go, for example, to the further point, which is around the airport or the gas station, outside of zone A, B, and C, you can tell that the salinity is very low compared to the Pueblo, for example. And even after the Pueblo, it's just drastically sorry for that word, falls. So that was a surprise in that sense. So we can observe that mangroves are, of course, flourishing more when they are closer to the coast. The last methodology was that there is a lot of information about the hydrological pattern of either Quintana Roo or the Yucatan Peninsula that is available online. It's a lot of work to go through all of it, either in English or in Spanish. The most important study was the one from Juan Sanchez, which made me write to him and consider the piezometer analysis, because he was able to do the water flow direction. So it will be interesting to find with him how he did that. So I was not able to get those information from him. I guess we were hoping to be able to have the elevation map, but as we can tell, it's basically gradient as for the first methodology. So you can see gradient contour lines and just gradients that are perpendicular and that leads to the direction of the water flow. Another will be, for example, the aspect of the hydrogeology of southern Campeche and Quintana Roo, which provides a lot of great information. The third article is the hydrogeochemistry of Yucatan Peninsula, so we can compare with the information of the water analysis we have from the previous study. And basically, so there's a lot of study available. What we can tell and we can summarize is that the Yucatan Peninsula is mainly flatlands, as we know. It's the most extensive aquifer system of the planet with limestone, which we mentioned already. And it mentions that the seawater intrusion is up to tens of kilometers inland, which is really interesting because we can see the filtration of salinity occurs really, really close to the coast, but it doesn't mean that through cenotes, through aquifers, through rivers, Rio Bermejo, for example, it just doesn't go inland. And another interesting thing was to consider the hydraulic conductivity. So there's two types of hydraulic conductivity that are being explored in our region of Quintana Roo. And according to a study, the Laguna de Bacalar has no direct connection to the ocean. So it's also interesting to consider because it's a big water area in this sector. So finally, what I would recommend, it will be to do a long-term chemical analysis. So to have it through different seasons, to have it long-term, so 2, 3, 4 years, in different conditions, so not always the rainy season, but also the dry season, of course. And this will be, we will be able to see the variation of all the parameters that we think are important and to have more accurate information also. Considering the 3D mapping, so as I spoke with Andres, which introduced you to my project earlier, it will be important to do 45 angles UAV imagery. So we will have really accurate elevation maps. So for example, what we took, it was only 90 degrees, so perpendicular image, but it provides little or lacking information about the elevation. So using both phase 5, and phase 6 data, we could compare the species distribution to salinity. So Yanis de Pereiras already did a salinity exploration of Mahahual region using another tool, which was more like a more basic scientific parameter tool. And so it will be interesting to compare it. So it will be really important for the next intern, I think, to compile all the data that we ask, because I know that chemical water analysis has been done in previous with previous interns, so it will be important to compile this. Numerical groundwater modeling. So I put in my final report an article I found which was very interesting. It was providing ways to do really more deep groundwater modeling. So using really other softwares at QGIS and Drone Deploy, for example. And if we have someone that is comfortable with all those softwares, with coding, for example, it could be a great tool in the future. Aquifer vulnerability map was also another example of map that could have been done. And finally, the link between all phases will be essential to understand all the efforts of all the interns and all the information that we have that are recent for the small region of Mahahual. So thank you, Taketa, for having me, and I hope it's going to really help the other interns, and I'm available if they have any questions.
Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you. Okay, I'm trying to, j'essaie de quitter la... All right.
Thank you, Chloe. Thanks a lot. The work you've done is it's really complete. Thank you.
Oh my God.
I just wanted to add some comments. Yep. So I just wanted.
Look, I can't hear you anymore, though.
Yes. So I just wanted to mention. Yeah. Go. Wait, am I listening to myself? Wait a second. All right, I'm having some echo issues here, so I'm gonna be fast with this. I just wanted to mention that, for one thing, something that we kind of already knew is that with the maps that you've given us, we can tell for real that El 55, that part of Mahahual is at the driest place that it could have been built. On the other side, for concerning the salinity gradient that you've shown us, it closely matches some regional research that we conducted early on. So most of the water in Tacata, we know that it drains into Bahía de Chetumal, and there's only a small intrusion of seawater into land. What I think would be interesting from now on is to check the ecological connections in terms of which species are getting into the mangrove and from the reef, and seeing how they're getting there, which from where they're accessing the mangrove in the rainy season. And it also gives us an idea of where, you know, the distribution of mangroves, since it completely depends on the salinity gradient. Your research is going to help us a lot to pinpoint which species are to be protected and which species were to prioritize in conservation efforts. So thanks a lot.
Well, thanks to you for having me, and I really hope it's going to give great tools exactly for the other interns to analyze the data or just conduct the other methodology. So either with the drone or the water chemical analysis, surely.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot to everyone who was present and listening, and thanks a lot, Chloe. Thanks. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.